Well, hello everyone and welcome to this live stream on India's upcoming election. I'm Ruth Pollard, Managing Editor of Bloomberg Opinion in Asia, coming to you from Tokyo. And with me are columnists Andy Mukherjee in Hong Kong and Mihir Sharma, who's in London, though all three of us have been writing on and observing India for some time. Now, India's elections kick off on April 19. There are 7 phases over the coming weeks, with the last one on June 1. Then we'll be glued to our screens on June 4 for the results. But if you believe the polls, this vote is a done deal, and we will see Prime Minister Narendra Modi returned for a third term in office. Andy, I'll come to you first. Is Modi as popular as the polls would have us believe?
Yes, he actually is, Ruth. In fact, 75% approval ratings, according to the last poll that I saw, that was in February. Now, 75% is a big number for someone who has spent 10 years in office. Mind you, this 75% is 92% approval rating in the north and 35% in the south. So there is a north-south disconnect. And that probably relates to the fact that this particular survey was done in February, just after the January temple consecration, which was basically a North Indian event. So obviously, not a surprise that it boosted his approval ratings in the north. But yes, he is, at least in North India, very popular.
And would you agree with that, Mihir? You've described the Prime Minister in one of your recent columns as one part king, one part high priest, and one part Mr. Rogers.
Yes, I think that what's extraordinary is how effectively the Prime Minister has put himself really beyond politics for a lot of people. They seem to think of him either as a member of their family or somebody that they can turn to for advice on pretty much anything, and not necessarily the way that most people think about political leaders. And he is, at least as Andy says, in North and West India, distinctly more popular than his party. And definitely, I think that in most of our lifetimes, we'd have to go back to the heyday of Indira Gandhi to find somebody who's as dominant as he is.
Indeed, his photo is everywhere, from our vaccination certificates to the food, the grains that are handed out to the poor, to billboards advertising the G20. So he is omnipresent in India, especially in the north, right, Andy?
And you can take a selfie with him at one of those selfie kiosks, if you want, where you have a cardboard cutout of the Prime Minister, and you can click a photo with him. So yes, his face is everywhere, and as Mihir said, he has in some important ways put himself above and beyond politics. And right now, the one popular trend in India is that everyone, or rather people who are going to vote for him, are identifying themselves as Modi's family, Modi ka parivar. Now, this is something interesting, and obviously, this is a social media thing, a social media phenomena. But it's really interesting that he has actually managed to put himself, almost insert himself into people's lives as Mihir said, as an advisor, as a confidant, as a friend, as a family member.
And Mihir, in terms of other leaders that we look at around the world, is there anyone we can compare Modi to?
I think that one of the interesting things about him is that although he has many of the hallmarks of sort of the classic populists of various other kinds, from Erdogan to Orban to Duterte to Xi of China to Trump, obviously. In some ways, he has been more successful than any of them, and part of that is because he has actually worked in office to develop a slightly softer image than what he uses to get himself elected. So unlike many other populists who govern in office sometimes even more acerbically and sharply than they campaigned, Modi does it the other way around. He campaigns very sharply, but in office he tends to try and reach out and claim to represent as many sections of society as possible. So he's a little bit more effective at staying in power than most other people. But on the other hand, he does have pretty many of the same tricks. Does use many of the same tricks that the other populists from Orban to Erdogan have.
Sure. And of course, along with his extraordinary power comes questions about India's increasing autocratic tendencies. And as we know, it's now categorized as an electoral autocracy because of its decreasing media freedoms, crackdown on social media, and also attacks on civil society and the opposition. So, Andy, I'll come to you. Just how democratic will these elections be?
Not very. I mean, if that's really our main question today, and my answer has to be not very democratic, because as you said, VDEM has already categorized India as an electoral autocracy for some time now, actually, and it refers to India as one of the world's worst autocratizers in the last 10 years. Now, obviously, that's all linked to the rise of Modi and his authoritarian style of functioning that holds very scant regard for institutions of any kind. But the man, or the strong man, if you will, is only one part of the equation. And I also sort of tend to look at two other elements of that same equation apart from the man, which is the money, which is electoral funding. Has always been a gray, opaque area, but things have happened and we can discuss them at more length later in the discussion. But money and the machine, the electronic voting machine, to be specific. Now, these are the two other elements which are sort of, in my opinion, pushing India on a slippery slope to being a near complete closed autocracy. So yes, I have very strong doubts about India's democratic future.
And Mihir, what about you? You've written recently that India's elections are still free, but they may not be completely fair. Can you explain what you meant when you wrote that?
I think that where I probably differ most from Andy is I think that I'm not sure it's the electronic voting machines that are at work. But so I'm not sure those are relevant. But there is a machine that I think that does make a difference here, and that is the BJP's sort of party machinery, and that grinds exceedingly fine in the sense that it all other political parties are grist to its mill. I just heard yesterday or recently that one of the most sort of inspiring young student leaders from 10 years ago who rose from nothing in UP to become a firebrand female leader in Allahabad University has joined the BJP in spite of having developed a career fighting against it. And it's just one of those things where the use of multiple different levers of state power, the ability to keep opponents out of office and off balance and in trouble, together just constrain the opposition into a smaller and smaller space. They're unable to make their case, such as it may be, to anybody, particularly in the north or the west, and that means that the BJP operates a larger and larger proportion of the political space and of individuals' mind space. So I think that that's where the lack of fairness comes in. There's not exactly a sort of classical liberal clash of ideas happening here. All right, it's like one very, very overwhelming narrative, and pushed through the media, through social media, through your family, through family WhatsApp groups, and one very, very quiet note of opposition that gets quieter every month.
Sure, and I mean, Andy, you've written about this recently. Of course, the arrest of Delhi's Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal, the freezing of the main opposition Congress party's bank accounts. I mean, these are bold steps made by a national government weeks out from an election. So what do they tell you about the government's thinking?
Well, we all know about the international reaction to these events. That excuse me, that reaction was pretty strong. But at home, we have to remember that these were reactions to something else, and that something else was the Indian Supreme Court's very sudden decision and welcome decision to declare the anonymous funding of political parties, the scheme that was known as electoral bonds and had been introduced by the Modi government in 2018. The Supreme Court's decision to declare that as unconstitutional and to demand that all the data pertaining to past donations uh, be released in public domain. Now, the the moves of Arvind Kejriwal's arrest and the tax department's action against the Congress party's bank accounts, these events following the Supreme Court's decision on electoral bonds clearly showed that this entire thing about the electoral bonds and the quid pro quos around those electoral bonds, the linkages between money and politics, the astounding rise of crony capitalism in the last few years, that all of these things were something that the BJP did not want people to focus their attention on, not with elections so close and not having already played their trump card, which was the temple inauguration and the religious polarization that had already happened in January. So clearly, they acted against Kejriwal, who, by the way, was the second chief minister who's been arrested by federal agencies, and the freezing of Congress Party's bank accounts. Now, have they really made a difference to the voters? Now, the voters perhaps are not able to understand all the nitty-gritty, the fine print around electoral bonds and who made money, how much, and what exactly was the quid pro quo involved. They don't care, but the very fact that there is now a huge overhang, if you will, um, of crony capitalism on this particular on this particular election. That's something that people have broadly understood. Um, Now, has that is that going to make a difference to the vote share of BJP? Let's just say that in the north, it may not cost them too many votes, but then it's definitely not going to also increase their votes beyond what they would have hoped on January 22nd when the temple was inaugurated. Um, but there is a sense of disquiet, especially with Kejriwal's arrest and the Congress Party's sort of bank account freeze, because everybody understands that that Indian elections are expensive. I mean, the last one cost something like $9 billion for all parties to contest. This one is probably going to be even more expensive. So just before elections, you sort of completely, or rather to a great extent, incapacitate your main opposition by freezing their bank accounts, and you put a popular Delhi leader in jail. Now, these actions were obviously, uh, as you said, bold, and they might have also been an overreach. But what impact they will make to actual vote shares or seat shares in the north, we will only know on June 4th.
And Mihir, what do you think? I mean, we've heard from Andy about what the voters might think, but what do India's global partners think? What does the US think when it sees, India taking these actions just weeks from an election? Does it disturb them?
Um, if it disturbs them, they aren't staying. And I think that the interesting thing about the past 10 years has been that we can pretty much do anything in India without getting a lot of criticism from the US in particular, which shuts up. Um, and if anything, there's been no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans on this one. In fact, Biden has been perhaps a little weaker on human rights, if anything, than at least the Trump administration at the middle level would ask for certain minority protections to be retained. But you know, last year when Bangladesh went into elections with similarly unfair, with a similarly unfair background, the Biden administration went after Bangladesh in a very sort of transparent manner, and almost embarrassingly loud, in fact. And this year they're embarrassingly